mute your phone because you are with your earpiece, right? So you
Yeah, but if I'm playing the laptop so I can hear it, won't that get into the phone?
well, but in the phone it's just you and me. Yeah, if you want to mute the phone, that would help me so I don't hear the background noise. You know, that would be fine. And then when you need to talk, unmute it. All right. So we're gonna go with the video right now.
Marguerite Horberg, and I'm the founder and director of Hot House. Hot House has developed the Hot House Global channel as an online streaming initiative to serve the NGO, small business, and cultural industries adversely impacted during this health and economic crisis. Our curatorial focus extends the more than 3-decade output we have made via live venues, as well as the ongoing commitment to the amplification of commercially marginalized cultural expression and social justice activism. Hot House extends our long-time innovation in intersectionality and multidisciplinary programming to the developing medium of live streaming. Hot House has partnered with curators and artists to present an astonishing array of cultural programming, original cultural programming. We invest many hours on the back end testing the various streaming options and working alongside the artists to communicate their vision. This alchemy is labor intensive and exciting as we are all breaking new ground together. We are indebted to the development team who are investing hundreds of hours of their volunteer time to contribute to this project and give back to the community. We know so many of our colleagues in the cultural sector and small business, nonprofits, and entertainment with venues, the record labels, talent managers, booking agents, and dozen more professionals have all been decimated economically. As a leader in the nonprofit cultural center, we see this contribution of this free service as a heartfelt donation to honor the privilege we have enjoyed in our work since 1987. 100% of the donations contributed during the performance will be directed to the performers and the designated recipients for each event. We will hope you will join us for these events, spread the word, contribute financially, write words of encouragement in the chat boxes, and give your wholehearted support to this sector. Our core team is Edward Wilkerson, Vedran Rasibegovich, Jonathan Woods, Dushan Mosley, Paul Lawrence, Louis Che Han, David Offenberg, and myself, Marguerite Horberg. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We hope you will enjoy the show. Please give as much as you can to the artists, and please come back and tell your friends. Thank you. Marguerite Horberg.
Go.
Hi, I'm Howard Mandel. I'm president of the Jazz Journalists Association. I'm a board member of the Jazz Institute of Chicago. I'm the author of two books, which I'll talk about a little later. And I want to thank Marguerite Horberg for inviting me to be the MC of tonight's Chicago Experimental uh, show on Hot House Global. This is going to be exciting for me, and I hope for you, and I hope for the musicians. I'm pretty sure it will be, because this is brand new technology that we're playing around with here, and anything can happen. Like, for instance, you're not seeing the top of my head, you're seeing a lot of my forehead, of which there's plenty. But we're not going to really let that stop us from enjoying the music, which is the main thing tonight. And we have three performances. The first will be Dave Rempis, one of the most amazing brazen saxophonists in Chicago, I should say. Alto player. He's been in Chicago and part of the important experimental scene here since about 1997. Dave came out of Northwestern University where he was studying ethnomusicology and African studies, and he joined Ken Vandermark's Five at age 22. Since then, he has been playing fire-breathing saxophone. And he also works as the president of the board of the Elastic Arts Foundation. He was one of the people behind Umbrella Music. He's been the business manager for Pitchfork. And tonight is kind of a record release party of sorts for a quartet recording that he did, put out on his own Aerophone Records. Aerophonic Records. That record is called The Eagle. It features a quartet. Saxophonist Michael Foster joins Dave Rempis, and also Jason Rebke on bass, Tyler Damon on drums. But tonight, Dave Rempis is playing solo, and this goes back to one of the first Chicago experimental records I've got to think of, 4 Alto by Anthony Braxton, which came out, I think, in 1969, 2 LP set at the time, one of the first daring explorations of solo saxophone playing. Now, I don't hear a lot of the Anthony Braxton style in Dave Rempis's sound, but certainly Rempis, well, certainly I should ask him, I shouldn't speak for him, admires Anthony Braxton and admires the freedoms and the insights and the incisiveness that alto saxophone playing developed by soloists such as Braxton were able to bring to the table. So let's hear what Dave Rempis is going to do with this sound tonight. I'm Howard Mandel. You're going to hear Dave Rempis. If you like what he's doing, go to Aerophonic Records online and pick up his new album,
Duke Ellington, appropriate for the season, which is almost the end of winter here in Chicago. We're maybe getting close to that. This is called A Flower is a Lovesome Thing. My favorite recording of which is on a record called The Unknown Sessions that my friend Jeb Bishop gave to me years ago, which is a small band Ellington recording. So this is a piece I also did on my solo record Lattice, which came out in 2017. So thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks Hot House Global for inviting me. This is Dave Rempis, and here we go. Thanks very much. That was A Flower is a Lovesome Thing by the great Billy Strayhorn, I believe, actually. Going to play a few more pieces for you. I want to mention once again, my name is Dave Rempis. My record label is aerophonicrecords.com. I would love it if, rather than, for example, making a donation tonight, that you would go to my record label and purchase a record. I'm using these weekly Wednesday night streams that I'm doing as the opportunity to launch a brand new digital-only release each week. Some stuff from the vault, so to speak, that's been recorded over the last few years but hasn't yet seen the light of day. Since I'm at home not playing concerts, I figured I would take this opportunity to get some of that stuff out there to the broader public. So tonight I'm releasing a quartet recording called The Eagle, and it features Michael Foster from New York on saxophones, Jason Rebka on bass, and Tyler Damon on drums. It was recorded last year at the Hungry Brain in Chicago in March of 2019. It's a fantastic band. Michael Foster, if you don't know him, is an incredible young saxophone player from New York. A lot of people know him as a pretty rugged experimentalist. Although I can say from having him stay at my apartment a few times, his tenor sound is like Coleman Hawkins and his soprano sound is like Sidney Bechet. It's amazing to hear him practice because his tone on the instrument and his abilities on it are really, truly astounding. Beautiful player from New York, very much worth checking out. Jason Rebka, the bass player on this recording, is somebody who I've been working with since 1998. We have a very long history, and as he pointed out to me the other day, this is actually the first recording that we've put out together since 2005, since we did a quartet recording together on 482 Music that came out with Jim Baker and Tim Daisy many years ago called Out of Season. And Tyler Damon, the drummer on that record, is somebody who I've been working with a whole lot over the last few years in my trio Kuzu, in a duo context, and in other ad hoc groupings. Tyler is like somebody who moved to Chicago a few years ago now, but had already created a lot of different connections in the city here, living in Bloomington, Indiana. And when he moved here, he's really kind of become one of the first call percussionists on the improvised music scene for sure. Totally amazing drummer. So I very much urge you to check out the brand new recording that just came out officially about a half hour ago. That's at aerophonicrecords.com. Just look under digital releases. And the name of the record, again, is called The Eagle. All the proceeds from that get split equally amongst all of the musicians who are on it. So another good way to put some love out there to the art and music community at this time, since everyone's basically out of work. I'm going to continue with an improvisation. I grabbed the wrong horn on alto saxophone. I was very lucky the other night to hear Joe McPhee on the quarantine concerts that are run through Experimental Sound Studio here in Chicago, and he was being interviewed by a very old friend of mine, Ken Vandermark, and he was talking about making the choice at some point to move towards completely improvised material rather than writing compositions still, and described working with Pauline Oliveros and really thinking about basically letting the path unfold in front of you. That's what I often do as a musician, and so that's what I'm going to continue with. The next few pieces is a few free improvised things for you that I hope you'll enjoy. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks very much. That was a little improvisation for you. Once again, my name is Dave Rempis. I'm here tonight on a concert curated by Hot House Global. Big thanks to them for inviting me tonight. I do have a brand new record out today called The Eagle. It's available at aerophonicrecords.com. Please check that out. I think you'll see the link in my bio or on the screen that you're watching. A few new hard copy releases on the label include a brand new record with Joe McPhee on reeds and trumpet, Tamika Reed on cello, Brandon Lopez on bass, and Paul Nilsson Love on drums. That just went on sale a few weeks ago. It's called Of Things Beyond Thule, Volume 2. Volume 1 came out on vinyl back in February and is now mostly sold out, aside from a waiting list for the last few copies. So Volume 2 is now available. The official release date is May 19th, which is next week. I would love it if you pick up a copy of that. The other new hard copy release that just came out on Aerophonic Records is a duo record with Frank Rosalie on percussion, one of my very long-term collaborators. Frank moved to Amsterdam from Chicago a few years ago, and so we've kept in touch in various ways, doing a few tours together, and on his one visit back in 2018, we made a brand new record. So I hope you'll check those out. The duo with Frank is called Codes Myths. Also, as I mentioned, available at aerophonicrecords.com. I'm going to continue doing these live stream concerts every Wednesday night. Next week I will be back. You can check it out at daverempis.com/live. That concert's sponsored by Sidebar New Orleans, which is a fantastic venue down in New Orleans. If anyone down there knows it, Andy Dirta's curating that, but a lot of New Orleans friends play there quite regularly. Jeff Alpert and Helen Gillet and Doug Garrison and Dan Osterreicher, and a lot of great New Orleans musicians work there a lot. It's really become the home for improvised music in New Orleans. So I hope you'll check that out too. I'm going to do another improvisation for you now. This is a piece on tenor. The horn's a little cold because my practice space doesn't have any heat, and it's Chicago, so it's still cold at this time of year. So I'm going to try to warm it up a little first. Thanks. That was a little tenor saxophone improvisation. I'm going to chat a little bit more because, you know, that's one of the things about this new streaming format that feels like something needs to be done differently rather than just running it like a normal everyday performance that you might do at a club or something. And one of the things that has been distracting my attention a little bit over the last few weeks has been kind of reflecting on where I came from musically, some of the things that happened to me when I was younger. And when I was looking at the bill tonight, for those of you watching on Hot House Global, you'll notice that this is part of a triple bill. At 8 o'clock, Janice Misurell-Mitchell is going to be performing solo, a fantastic flautist here in Chicago, composer, educator. And at 9 o'clock, Charles Rumback's Fast Shadows is happening with a bunch of fantastic musicians, Macy Stewart, Jim Baker, some incredible dancers, Jasmine Mendoza. I believe Marie Casimir is on it, although I'm not positive about that, and I know Kim Alpert is doing visuals for that, so that's going to be a really incredible lineup at 9 p.m. As I was thinking about those today, I posted something on Instagram about this concert, and a friend of mine got in touch and said, "Oh wow, you're doing a double bill with Janice. I used to know her from the School of the Art Institute." And he said, "You've got to check out these videos that she did in the 90s called Point Counterpoint that are on YouTube." So I dialed one up, and the first one I found was called Scat/Rap. And it's pretty great. It looks like it's from about 1990 or 91, and Janice is there with a drummer, and they're kind of moving to different places all over the city of Chicago where they're performing. And one of the places that she sets up in front of is a club called the Bop Shop that used to be on Division Street in the middle of Wicker Park at Division and Wood. And it like really brought me back because it was actually the first jazz club I went to when I moved to Chicago to go to college in 1993. I had a jazz combo coach named Steve Ramsdell, who was a guitarist, and he had a gig coming up at the Bop Shop. And so probably the first week I moved to Chicago, I went to this club to check it out. And it was a pretty amazing experience. I grew up in Boston, and coming out to Chicago, it's a much bigger city. It just feels way more urban and way more big than a place like Boston. And I remember driving down Lakeshore Drive from Evanston and getting off at North Avenue, coming down LaSalle, and turning on to Division and, like seeing Cabrini Green for the first time, which was a pretty powerful and eye-opening experience. And we continued across Division over to Wicker Park, which at the time on a Tuesday night at 9:30 was like a ghost town. I mean, it was completely empty. There was nobody on the street. It felt, like very impressive, the scale of the architecture here in Chicago. And I was just amazed by the emptiness of it, which is kind of funny because nowadays if you went to Wicker Park, it's always packed full of people 24 hours a day. But at that time, it was a different story. So the Bop Shop became a regular stop for me. Over the next few years, I went there quite regularly. My junior year of college, I went abroad for a year, and I was studying abroad. And when I came back, I joined kind of a funk jam band called Mr. Slinks at my university, and we had a regular standing gig on Thursday nights at the Bop Shop, which was like really my first regular gig in the city of Chicago. I think it was every 2 weeks that we would play there, and it was great. We would pack the place out and play kind of a weird mix of like Chicago blues meets jam band meets weird free improvisation, and they would just kind of let me go off and take these long 10-minute solos and whatnot, and there would be a bunch of kids dancing out front. Everybody would probably, who I know now, would probably give me a lot of shit for being in that band and make fun of it, but it was quite fun at the time, and it was a great first gig experience. And as I got out of college, I was, I'd been managing a cafe all through college, and I thought, I should get a bartending job. And so I figured I'd ask at the Bop Shop and see if they would hire me as a bartender. In the meantime, the club had closed in Wicker Park because of gentrification, so they got pushed out. They moved up to Andersonville for a minute, for those of you who know Chicago, into what was a Middle Eastern restaurant at the time. And it was two storefronts together. On one side they had a bar, and the other side they had a restaurant. But it seemed like they couldn't possibly get enough people in there to fill it, so they rented it out to Kate Smith, who owned the Bop Shop. So she was up there for a couple of months, and that was one of the first places where I met Jim Baker, the amazing piano player and electronics player, who's going to be also playing tonight with Charles's band. I met him there for the first time on a double bill that we did with his terrible funk band while he was playing a duo with Damon Short on percussion. And that was great. I mean, I think I'd seen Jim play before, but it was the first time I actually got a chance to talk to him. And man, he knows how to talk. He can he can take you to another place musically and personally. Jim's a really special guy. So I very much remember that experience. And the Bop Shop, after moving up to Andersonville, for those of you who know Chicago, that storefront later became Stargaze, which was like the only lesbian bar in Chicago for a long time. And more recently, it turned into Jerry's Sandwiches as the neighborhood has become more and more gentrified. And thankfully, that place closed, but God knows what it's going to become now. But so the Bop Shop in the summer of '97 moved down to Roosevelt and Wabash in the South Loop of Chicago, which at the time was still kind of rough and tumble. And the club that it moved into previously had been called the Cleopatra Show Lounge. And it was owned by an old Greek guy named George Mitchell, who had been a restaurant owner in the South Loop for many years. A lot of people who went to school at the School of the Art Institute would know him for George Mitchell's Artist Cafe on South Michigan Avenue, which was a pretty well-known diner there that a lot of students would hang out at, which was a 24-hour diner. But he also owned this strip club called the Cleopatra Show Lounge right at the corner of Roosevelt and Wabash, next door to the Roosevelt Wabash Hotel, which at the time was a big SRO hotel. And so I went down in August of 1997 and I asked the owner for a job there as a bartender. And she said, well, yeah, maybe. Why don't you come by next week and we'll try you out and see how you do. We should have a big night. I think it was a Monday or Tuesday. So I went down the next week, and as it turned out, the Rolling Stones were playing at Soldiers Field a couple blocks away from there. And she was expecting a big night, and we were at the bar. It was probably 7 o'clock, and there were some people coming in, but not enough to like really justify two bartenders. So I said, look, I'm going to go on the corner and get some business in here. So I walked out to the corner and just started barking and getting people into the bar, yelling last drink before Soldiers Field. And in no time, the bar was like packed full of people, and I got hired. I got my bartending job, which I was very excited about. I had met a ton of people there. I poured my first martini for anyone there, which was a hilarious experience because one of our bar regulars, whose name I've forgotten, but very well-dressed older African-American gentleman who would come in every day after work. And he came in my first night bartending and he ordered a gin martini. And, I didn't know much about bartending. I'd read some cocktail books and whatnot. And so I pulled out a martini glass and I poured some warm gin in it. And I poured some warm vermouth on top, and I put a few olives in it, and I put it on the bar, and he took one sip of it and kind of sputtered it out all over the bar, and looked over at Kate Smith, the owner, who was sitting at the end, and said, "Kate, come here. You got to teach this boy how to make a martini." So that was how I first learned to make a martini. Kate came behind the bar and showed me how to chill a glass and chill alcohol and shake it and pour it into a glass. So from there, I was able to make a martini, but I was also able to make a living as a bartender for quite a long time. Some of the other things that happened to me at the Bop Shop, which were pretty amazing, I met a lot of very special musicians. Lyn Halliday, fantastic Chicago tenor saxophone player, led the open mic session there every Tuesday night. He also had Robert Berry in the band, who a lot of people know from playing with Sun Ra. He'd worked with so many different people over the years. So the two of them were in this band that would play on Tuesday night. And, Lyn was an incredible saxophone player, an incredible character. I think he was probably in his early 60s at that time, but he lived a very, very hard life, and he looked like he was probably about 85. He was on crutches and had dentures and, really couldn't get around very well, completely emaciated. some weeks he would show up and play amazing. I mean, you couldn't believe what he was doing, the way he looked. And other weeks he just wasn't in that good shape, and he died not long thereafter. But it was a very beautiful experience to get a chance to know him and to know Robert a little bit down there. I also got to know another very long-term friend and colleague of mine, Mike Reed, who was a drummer on the vocal open mic jam session there on Wednesday nights with a pretty goofy band and a pretty goofy lineup of people who used to come down for it. But Mike was there soldiering it out. I think it was pretty soon after college for him too, and he was looking for gigs in the city. And so that's where he and I first connected, and we went on to do a lot of different things together over the years, musically and professionally and everything else. So great to meet all those people. The set of the Bop Shop down there was really like a Cassavetes film. I don't know how to describe it, like tiered seating in a club that fit about 100 people with like leather banquettes and brass. There was still a stripper pole on stage. It was just an amazing place to see a concert, like smoke filled, a side of Chicago that like you really just don't see anymore. And the best part was that George Mitchell, who was the owner, would come downstairs every single night. No matter who was playing, it might be Von Freeman, it might be a singer, it might be Ken Vandermark playing really outside stuff. George Mitchell would come down with this guy who was there to help him down the stairs, who I think lived upstairs also. He'd sit in the booth closest to the bar, and he'd love every minute of every single performance that was happening. He'd drink his vodka on the rocks and just be the sweetest guy in the world. Say thank you to everybody, clap, be so into it, man. And that was just a very inspiring thing to see, this crazy old Greek guy who loved every minute of the music that he could possibly get. So I had a great time working at the Bop Shop, and it led to a lot of great things for me. I want to play a piece dedicated to Kate Smith, who was the owner of the Bop Shop at that time. And I apologize for all the talking, but as I said, it's kind of a nice opportunity doing these podcasts or streams or whatever to change it up a little bit and add a little something different. So I hope you don't mind me indulging. Oh, the other thing about Kate Smith is that she told me her best moment as the owner of the Bop Shop was when she got Anita O'Day to come out sometime probably around 1995 to come and do a weekend at the Bop Shop. And if you know Anita O'Day, man, she's fantastic. And I just love the fact that Kate was so excited to have Anita O'Day in the club. So this is for Kate and Anita O'Day. Thanks. Not sure what time it is. I'm going to take a quick look. I think I got a few more minutes, and I'd oh, no, it's late. Man, I talked my way through. All right. I'm going to wrap it up because at 8 p.m. we've got Janice Misurell-Mitchell coming on. Thank you all very, very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Once again, if you'd like to support me in whatever way, you can go to aerophonicrecords.com and buy a record. I would greatly appreciate that. A new one out today called The Eagle with Michael Foster on saxophones, Jason Rebka on bass, Tyler Damon on drums. I'll be continuing these live streams every week on Wednesday nights. Check out daverempis.com/live for that. And thank you guys very much. Really, really appreciate you all being here tonight and checking it out. And yeah, big hugs out there. Everyone stay well. Keep your heads together. We're all going to make it through this fucking weird time. So yeah, thanks everybody. Take it easy.
This is Howard Mandel. That was Dave Rempis. Dave is a fantastic tenor, alto, and baritone player. As you heard, he did A Flower is a Lonesome Thing on baritone. That's a Billy Strayhorn composition. And then he played free improvisations on alto and tenor, using a lot of extended techniques, especially on the alto. Those whistle tones, that altissimo register way up high. And on the baritone, he was doing circular breathing, which is not the easiest thing to do either. It takes a lot of air coming from the belly and just circulating through the cheeks and nose, nasal passages. Keep that going. So Dave Rempis, fantastic performance. And if you like what you heard, visit him at aerophonicrecords.com. Aerophonic, of course, is spelled A-E-R-O, phonic, P-H-O-N-I-C, A-E-R-O-P-H-O-N-I-C. So Dave has his new quartet record, Eagle, and also records with Frank Rosalie that he mentioned, and with Joe McPhee. Wonderful repertoire available to purchase at aerophonicrecords.com. We are going to move along tonight. We have Janice Misurell-Mitchell up next, and then we'll be hearing a multimedia performance by Charles Rumback. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Howard Mandel, president of the Jazz Journalists Association, and a writer with a couple books out. One is Miles Ornette Cecil, Jazz Beyond Jazz. The other is Future Jazz. These are both available through Amazon. Of course, I also was the editor of the new and expanded edition of the Jazz and Blues Encyclopedia. This came out last year, and it's a useful publication, I think. A note about tomorrow's scheduled performance on Hot House Global. It was to be Amir El-Safar with a quartet. Amir performed last week on Hot House Global. The concert is still happening, but it's not happening tomorrow. It's happening on Saturday at 7 p.m. And Amir, who is a fantastic trumpet player, Chicago, and originally came up through the Chicago Symphony student orchestra, and also was playing in a lot of blues clubs at that time. And now he's gone on to be really a major figure in the emergence, fusion, we might say, development, let's say, of jazz with Iranian music. He's a deep student of the maqam. And he'll be playing with his drummer Nasheed Waits, one of the great jazz drummers of our day, Carla DeRosa on bass, and Safar Tawil, who is an oudist. So that should be a great show. That's Saturday at 7 p.m. here on Hot House Global. But tonight we're listening to Chicago Experimental. And thanks to our curator, Marguerite Horberg, we have a really varied show. The sounds that Dave Rempis is playing on those saxophones, tough like Chicago is, but now we're going to hear Janice, who's a solo flutist, and of course she's not going to have that kind of saxophone timbre, but she has drawn on urban sounds for her palette, her musical palette. She's deeply involved with the energies and the several different music scenes in Chicago. She kind of crosses between jazz improvisation and new music composition. As she says on her website, she explores relationships between different areas of expression, traditional and extended techniques, sound and text, movement, oral and visual forms, classical and popular forms. So I don't know exactly what she's got in store for tonight, although she does say that she's got a Dada poem which relates to these times that's going to be part of the presentation. And also, I want to mention that Janice has two records out, both on Southport Records. Southport is one of the Chicago staple labels, run by the great Bradley Parker Sparrow and Joni Pilato, vocalist. They also have a great lineup, repertoire of albums, and go to southportrecords.com to see what they've got on the label. Besides Janice's work, but her records are called Uncommon Time, that's for flute, voice, and percussion. And there's also one called Vanishing Points. Those are both on Southport Records. Janice wants people to make donations tonight to Thresholds. That's a service agency in Chicago for those who have mental illness and substance abuse problems, disorders. Thresholds does innovative research and advocacy. They provide opportunities for housing, employment, and recovery. They give access to their clients to support networks that help create a holistic approach to recovery. And that's not available for most community health providers. So Threshold believes that everyone should have the opportunity to live a life of value, self-respect, compassion, and dignity. That's thresholds with an S.org. So make your donations there. And we are about to hear Janice Misurell-Mitchell. After her, Charles Rumback's multimedia performance. Right now, Janice Misurell-Mitchell.
Howard. Okay, I think Janet is live now. We lost her, so that's why. Oh, she's upside down. Jeez. Okay, I think she's ready. So, but she's upside down. Upside down. Why is she upside down? Can you talk a little longer?
On the board of the directors of the Jazz Institute of Chicago. This is one of our most important local institutions that supports jazz in all its forms, nurtures and preserves the, the history. We got such a great history lesson about the pop shop from Dave Rempis, and that's the kind of information that we really need to collect. Uh, we have it from the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s. The Jazz Institute has an archives located at University of Chicago's Regenstein Library, in which oral histories by major jazz musicians from the city have been archived. But we're continuing to do those kinds of oral history reports. Harriet Choice, who was the longtime features editor of the Tribune, Chicago Tribune, is on that archives committee, and she does quite a bit of the interviewing for those oral histories. Um, that material is available to anybody at all who wants to show up at the library when it opens again and ask to see the Jazz Institute of Chicago archival materials. I mentioned Harriet because she's one of the jazz heroes, the 2020 Chicago Jazz Heroes, that the Jazz Journalists Association, of which I'm president, announced back in April. And what we do is identify people who are not necessarily musicians, but maybe people who have contributed deeply to the culture, the ongoing jazz ecosystem of their location, their city. And this year we had 27 such jazz heroes celebrated in 24 U.S. cities. So in Chicago, our hero was Harriet Choice. In Boston, our hero was the pianist Rand Blake. And okay, so I was going to say that Rand Blake is going to be on a Zoom call celebrating his jazz heroism on May 23rd. If you want more information about that, please look at jjanews.org. That's the Jazz Journalists Association website, jjanews.org. Okay, I understand that the technical problems that Janice had to confront have been resolved. So I'm giving the signal 5 seconds, and you'll be hearing Janice Misurell-Mitchell.
Oh, well, I was gonna talk first, though. I really have to. Well, is that gonna be fed? Is that gonna happen? Okay. You tell me when to begin. Okay. Good evening. I'm Janice Misurell-Mitchell. I'm very happy to be on this program. That was a fantastic set that we just heard from Dave Rempis. And I want a great shout out to Marguerite Horberg, whose vision this was. Marguerite is always finding new ways to deal with political situations, we have to say, and this is ingenious. We're going to have people from all over the world on this series. I'm very happy to have this happen. I'm going to play 4 pieces today that involve flute and voice, so they're all texted in one way or another. And then as the ending, rather than another piece of mine, I'm going to perform the poem by Hugo Ball, Gaji Beri Bimba. The first piece is called Sub Music and Song for Solo Flute. And I wrote it in 1982, but in 82 I had it much more as in an improvisatory form. And 82 is very special because I don't think that many people watching right now who would remember, but it was the year of New Music America coming to Chicago. And Jane Byrne had no idea what New Music America was, but she knew that if she threw a lot of money to a big festival, people would like it, and like her, of course. So she gave $300,000 to New Music America so that we could have a festival that included many parts of the city. So there were dancers who were coming down from Belmont following a score that John Cage had created, and John Cage was here and sponsored several pieces, including the John Cage haiku, which were performed by the Chicago Symphony, and that in itself was extremely interesting for many ways. There was also a concert of Chicago composers at this point, and that actually was the birth of New Music Chicago, which is currently very active. It has been present and then not present on and off a couple of different times, but now it has a great incarnation, and I urge you to go to newmusicchicago.org to see what activities they have sponsored. This particular piece, as I said, had come from an improvisation, and I had structured it in a certain way that I knew what pitches I was going to play, and I knew what I was going to do, but of course with it being an improvisation, I was letting things happen at the time. I performed it for about 2 years that way, and then I notated it. And so what I'm going to play now is an actual notation of the piece. The piece is based on a stanza of a poem by Wallace Stevens. It's called Variations on a Summer Day. And I loved the poem and I loved the imagery, but as I started thinking about what I was doing with it, I realized that I had kind of taken it in a different direction. And so when you hear what he's talking about, think of it in sort of opposites, because there's a reference to the unconscious, and I'm sort of thinking of the unconscious as a multifaceted sound body. And so that's what you can imagine as you hear. Variations on a Summer Day, stanza 2. A music more than a breath, but less than the wind. Sub-music like sub-speech, a repetition of unconscious things, litters of rock and water, words of the visible elements and of ours. That piece also has been recorded, and it's a terrific recording by Pittman, a Chicago flutist and member of our organization Cube, that was a powerhouse new music group in the city for 25 years. It's on Opus 1 Recordings, which I think now you can get on Amazon, has to be Amazon, and you can get Sub Music and Song performed by Caroline, and also another piece that I've written around the same time for flute and guitar called On Thin Ice with Caroline and Jeff Cust on guitar. And if you want to hear a great recording of both pieces, they've done a wonderful job. The next piece is the result of actually composition students at DePaul being interested in the work of William Burroughs. And this was sometimes around the second half of the 90s, and there were quite a few people who were writing pieces based on Burroughs' texts, or they would be speaking Burroughs, or Burroughs somehow inspired them in various ways. And because I kept hearing so many aspects of Burroughs' work, I decided I wanted to do something based on his texts also. And there was something from his novel Word, which apparently had not been known very well until Allen Ginsberg's papers were gone through at Columbia, and they found within Ginsberg's papers was this very kind of short novel Word. And Word had amazing imagery and a lot of word salad, which we might expect also, which just made me feel I could do something more with voice and flute and this text. So the text is called Motel Loneliness, and it actually had a kind of visual inception in a performance exercise that I was involved in at the Cultural Center. It was one of those weekends where you go down and do a lot of movement and then work with texts, and then at the end we were supposed to have a piece that we created. And so a small group and I created a piece based on motel loneliness. And part of the idea is people celebrating and running into this motel, and then we were going to kind of fall asleep and various other things would happen, and it was basically a kind of down piece. The idea was the motel was this very seedy motel, and it had a light that said motel, probably with the E missing, and you were hearing the clicking of the lights. And that was an aspect I was thinking of. And then there's a reference to foghorns in the text. And so I started thinking that there were aspects that I could deal with in sound that would work very well with the flute. This is a text from Word by William Burroughs. The word, gentle reader, will flay you down to the laughing bones, and the author will do a striptease with his own intestines. Let it be. The word is divided into units, which be all in one piece, and should be so taken. But the pieces can be had in any order, being tied up, back and forth, in and out, fore and aft, like an interesting sex arrangement. This book spill off the page in all directions, kaleidoscope of vistas, medley of twos and string noises, screams of pain and pathos, and screams plain pathic, sigh of orgasm, heroine silent as the dawn in thirsty cells. Motel, motel, motel loneliness moans like foghorns over still oily waters. I need to take a message because possibly this isn't working. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So, motel loneliness. I'd like to have a very short break and talk a little bit about some other aspects of my work. I do a lot with text and flute, and sometimes I think more of altering the sound of the flute through the text. Other times, sometimes the text has prominence. There are also references in to various social movements and social aspects of society and political aspects. And so this next piece riffs off a lot of elements during the Occupy movement, which was in 2011 in this country, inspired, of course, by the Occupy movements and the Arab Spring, which had come earlier. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. From the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, September 17th, 1787. As we gather together in solidarity to express a feeling of mass injustice, we must not lose sight of what has brought us together. We have peaceably assembled here to let these facts be known, that no true democracy is attainable when the process is determined by economic power. From the Declaration of the General Assembly of Occupy Wall Street, September 29th, 2011. Speech. Each. Speech. Speech. Shush. Shut up. Shut up and sing. Money, money, assemble, peaceably, to express a feeling of mass injustice. We gather together in solidarity, to let these facts be known, that democracy is determined by economic power. Economic power. You got to fight for society. You got to fight. Occupamus. Let us occupy. You got to fight. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Thank you again for listening, for watching and listening. And there's another segment to the program after I finish, and you're very welcome. This is Charles Rumback, and David talked about them. I think that'll be very exciting, and of course a contrast, where each contrasts to each other. I'd also like to mention an ensemble that I am with at the moment, and this is called the 6 Degrees Composers. We are women composers of many different traditions. We were supposed to have a concert in June, and we're going to see if we can do something online in June instead, so stay tuned. I would like also to just mention that I am very proud of my label, my record label in Chicago, which is Southport Records. Joni and Sparrow, a shout out to them. They are incredibly supportive of Chicago performers and composers. One of my solo CDs with solo flute music is on a Southport label, including also some other work of mine, and then an ensemble CD as well. So thank you again to Joni and Sparrow. The next piece is called The Light That Burns. And this is dedicated to our son, Gabriel Mitchell, who passed away in 2012. Gabriel was a filmmaker, he was a visual artist, he wrote songs, a lot of satirical songs, and he was doing some sculptures also, and was a visionary. He was imagining a lot of possibilities for film and interaction as well. You can get his work on YouTube, and his website is filmworks.com, PHILMWRX. And you can write to me if you have ideas or comments about the website. It's ongoing. And this fall there's going to be a book about him written by my spouse, W.J.T. Mitchell, aka Tom Mitchell. And it's called Mental Traveler, and it's about his relationship with Gabe and a lot about Gabe's life and thoughts. Now, this piece is also in reference to film, and it's taking a phrase from the film Blade Runner, which many of you probably know, and you probably know this phrase. The phrase is part of a dialogue between Terrell and Roy. And Roy, as you know, is kind of the superhuman and also rather evil. And he says to Terrell, I want more life. And Terrell is saying that he's going to have to limit Roy's life. And he says, well, Roy, you know, the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And Roy's, very upset about this. If you know the movie, you know what happens next. If you don't know, I'm certainly not going to tell you right now. So this piece is based on that phrase. And it also has a phrase that uses Gabe's name. So G, A, B flat, E those are the pitches that will symbolize G, A, B, E. In German, the B is a B flat, so it works out really well. This is going to be on alto flute, so you'll hear different pitches, but that's basically something that's within this piece. The piece also uses the text to a fairly big extent. It uses some beatbox ideas and some Asian flute ideas and little hip-hop stuff, and then also new music textures. The Light That Burns. I wrote this in 2014. The light that burns twice as bright, burns half as long. The light that burns twice as bright, burns half as going to go on to a little bit more about the last part of this performance, and that is a poem which was written by Hugo Ball, the Dada poet, in 1916. And it's kind of amazing to think that it was more than 100 years ago. In 1916, there was a festival for Dada and Cabaret Voltaire, which had been in several cities in Europe and also in New York, if you remember about Marcel Duchamp. And I went to Zurich because I felt I had to go to a home place. And I went to Cabaret Voltaire, and I got to see the same setting that you can see on YouTube. If you Google Dada and you look for Dada performances, there are films of performances from there, and you'll get a sense of kind of early sensibilities that led to surrealism. So I think that it's very, very appropriate for us to look for alternate languages today as well. The piece that I'm performing today is Gaji Beri Bimba. I also, on YouTube, have Carovane, which is another piece, and that's actually the one that he was performing at Cabaret Voltaire. And I give a kind of introductory discussion of the piece on YouTube, but just briefly, when he was at Cabaret Voltaire, he came out with an outfit that kind of looked like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. It was silver, and it had kind of a large tube around the body, and the arms were so, they were cardboard, I think, but they were so large that he had to be carried out. He had a hat that was kind of pointy. And in the video, you can see that. In the video about Cabaret Voltaire, you'll also see that. And so it was adding to the absurdist quality of the poetry that he was speaking. And just to give you a little bit of what he said about this, and this is in the Dada Manifesto, he said, "I've invented a new series of verses without words. These are sound poems." And so he wants us to pay attention to the sounds within the words. And naturally, I think there's a certain sense that it has some kind of language, but there's no way we can really ascertain what it is. He also talked about the insanity of World War I. He was very despondent about this, as were many other artists. And the only thing he could think of is we have to have a language that is not the language we're using, the language of war, the language of destruction, but rather another language that we can't yet even figure out. And so this is the poem that he wrote at that time. Gaji Beri Bimba. Gaji Beri Bimba, glandra di lauda loni cadori. Gajama grama berita bimbala, glanre galassa lauli to lomini. Gaji Beri bin blassa glassa la laula loni cadorsu sasala bim. Gajama tufum I zimzala bimbam gligla wo woli mai bimberiban. O catalomine, rhinocerosa la hopsaman, la little lomini, ooh. Gajama rhinocerosa la hopsaman, luku terula la blaulo la lu. Zim, zim, ura la la, zim, zim, ura la la, zim, zim, Zanzibar, zimzala zam. Elefantalim, brusala bulaman, brusala blulaman, trontata. Veloti bong bong, afalo putsamai, lingado tor. Gajama, bimbalo, glandra di glassala, zinda da bimbalo, ugru, Viola, laxito, viola, zimbra bim, viola, uli, palugi, malu. Tufam I zimbra bin, negramai bumbalo, negrama bumbalo, tufam I zim. Gajama bimbala, beri gajama, gaga di ganjama, afella pinks. Gaga di bumbalo, gajamen. Gaga, the bling, blong, gaga, blong. Thank you. That's my program. I gather that you can make some contributions, and clearly you don't need to make anything to me, but if you do want to make a contribution, I would appreciate it very much if you would donate to Thresholds. This is an organization for the mentally ill and substance abuse people in Chicago. They're terrific. We had been working with them, or they worked with us for a few decades, and we're very appreciative of the work that they do. You can go onto their website, thresholds.org, and support them in that way. I thank you very much for watching and listening, and have a good night. Thank you.
Okay, you're on.
And we're very appreciative
Okay,
that they do.
that was Janice
Go onto their website.
Misurell-Mitchell playing multiphonics on alto flute, reciting Dada poetry, acting it out. Fantastic virtuoso performance of extended techniques. Janice has 2 records on the Southport label, Uncommon Time and Vanishing Points. And also, she is asking that donations go to threshold.org. That's a service agency in Chicago for those with mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders. So, thresholds.org, Janice Misurell-Mitchell. And I first met Janice when she was performing in my former wife, Kitty Brazelton's Festival of Women Improvisers, New Women Improvisers in the 1990s. That was here in Chicago. Janice is fantastic addition to the Chicago music scene, Chicago experimental in all of its dimensions. We started off with Dave Rempis, who has albums on aerophonicrecords.com. We're going to proceed to Charles Rumback's quartet. No, not quartet. It's a multimedia piece called Fast Shadows, with Kim Alpert having produced a video, I believe. Jasmine Mendoza movement, and music by Jim Baker on piano and Macy Stewart on violin. I'm Howard Mandel, just emceeing Hot House Global tonight, this show on Chicago Experimental. Let's see, what can we tell you about Charles Rumback? Fantastic drummer. Just put out a straight ahead, not really, an experimental album called June Holiday, which also features Jim Baker. Jim Baker and I go back to high school. I was lucky enough to meet him when I was a senior at New Trier, and we used to jam a little bit. Jim has always been a fantastic musician and electronics musician, and he's been the key player, or one of the key players in Extraordinary Popular Delusions, which has had a 13-year run of weekly performances, most recently at the Beat Kitchen. Hope the Beat Kitchen comes back online and Extraordinary Popular Delusions is able to perform again. And indeed, all of these performers that we've been seeing tonight, Dave Rempis, who has a strong connection with Elastic Arts, Janice Misurell-Mitchell, who I've seen perform at Constellation, and Charles Rumback, who's working, I think, at the Logan Center as a day gig, but performs in many of the small not-for-profit venues and places like Whistler, Hungry Brain. So we hope that the live music scene will come back online sometime soon, that we can defeat this virus and we can get together and hear live music again. Until then, we have, thanks to people such as Marguerite Horberg, who's behind Hot House Global, we have these opportunities to hear music online, live streamed. And this is an amazing technological opportunity. We need to work on it so that we can iron out some of the flaws, but I bet you we'll have those flaws ironed out before we get a vaccine to defeat the virus, I'm afraid. In any case, we will go on to Charles Rumback. Now, this piece, Fast Shadows, is a new composition of his and was created with Kim Alpert and Jasmine Mendoza as a collaboration, and featuring the music of Jim Baker and Mazzy Stewart. And I think Charles Rumback is playing sampler and also using a 4-track cassette player in this piece. I want to mention also, if you think of turning in tomorrow for Amir El Safar on Hot House Global, that concert has been pushed off till Saturday. That'll be Amir El Safar with his quartet, featuring drummer Nasheed Waits, bassist Carlos De Rosa, and oud player Safir Tawil. That'll be Saturday at 7 p.m. But until then, we still have more music tonight, and that's Charles Rumback's composition, Fast Shadows. So I hope they're ready, and I'm giving the 5-second bell ring.
connection. Just say something.
Oh, hi, folks. We're watching Hot House Global Chicago Experimental and having a little technical problem. This is Charles Rumback's piece called Fast Shadows, the multimedia element created by Kim Alpert, and the dancer is Jasmine Mendoza. And the music that you're hearing, besides Charles Rumback playing sampler and using a 4-track cassette player, it's Jim Baker on piano and Macy Stewart on violin. Now talk about Chicago Experimental.
Okay. We are back.
thank you guys for being here. This is a fun project. We're really happy to bring it to you, and thank you for listening if you're still here.
Yeah. It's
Okay,
over?
go. Go.
So, wow, that was certainly Chicago experimental. We're talking about Fast Shadows, the performance you just saw, Charles Rumback's creation with videographer Kim Alpert and dancer Jasmine Mendoza, and music by Rumback on sampler and 4-track cassette player, also Jim Baker on piano and Macy Stewart on violin. So you've been listening to and watching Hot House Global. This is the Chicago experimental program of it. I'm Howard Mandel, emceeing tonight. And just to remind you, we saw Dave Rempis early on playing solo saxophones. And Dave Rempis's music can be purchased through aerophonicrecords.com. Aerophonic is AEROPHONIC records.com. He has a new record called The Eagle. That's a quartet album, but he played solo, baritone, alto, and tenor saxophones, and also gave us a fascinating Chicago history of the Bop Shop and some of the other clubs that he was involved in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then we heard Janice Misurell-Mitchell playing solo flute, and lots of multiphonics and advanced techniques in that, which she included Dada poetry. And Janice has 2 records on the Southport Records label, Uncommon Time and Vanishing Points. But she asked that donations tonight be sent to thresholds.org, which is a service agency in Chicago for those with mental illnesses and substance use disorders. And then we've just heard, as I was saying, Fast Shadows, Charles Rumback's multimedia extravaganza, I think it's fair to say. And to donate to Charles, go to PayPal, and his email is SERLAHC, Serlahc, SERLAC, SERLAHC at gmail.com. SERLAHC@gmail.com, or Venmo /Charles-Rumback, RUMBACK. Support our musicians, please. Donate, send them some bucks as well as some love. And upcoming, the program, the Hot House Global program that was scheduled for tomorrow with Amir El-Safar, trumpeter Amir El-Safar, will instead be broadcast or videocast or Twitchcast on Saturday, 7 p.m. That will be with Amir El-Safar's quartet, featuring drummer Nasheed Waits and an oud player, Safir Tawil, and bassist Carlo DeRosa. So that's Saturday. And then we've got other programs coming up. Hot House Global will be on Tuesday, May 19th at 8 p.m. That's going to be Scatter Jazz at the Sidebar, live from New Orleans. Sidebar NOLA, New Orleans, Louisiana, presents music of all styles and focus on fully improvised sound sculpture. So that's Tuesday, May 19th at 8 p.m. here on this same Twitch channel. And coming up on the next weekend, May 23rd and 24th, live streaming from Paris, Tokyo, and Rajasthan. That'll be an Asian Improv Arts Showcase, Volume 2, that will be curated by Tatsu Aoki, one of our favorite Chicago bassists. And yes, on Saturday, the 23rd, 7 p.m., Asian Arts Improv Showcase, Volume 2, curated by Tatsu, on Sunday, May 24th at 9 p.m. Amaras Records presents living legend Laka Khan from Rajasthan, India. And that's presented by Ankur Malhotra. All of the Hot House Global presentations owe a huge debt. Thanks to Marguerite Horberg, producer of this series and the founder of Hot House. And I'm Howard Mandel, president of the Jazz Journalists Association, a Chicagoan writer, board member of the Jazz Institute of Chicago, and that's been quite a Chicago experimental evening. Thanks so much for everybody for coming. Please go to the hothouse.net website, sign the mailing list so that you can get notifications about the upcoming concerts. Donate to our musicians, buy the records. Hope that we can go out and see them live again soon. Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you, Luis, for being the engineer behind all of this. And spread the word about Hot House Global. Hope to see you again sometime, either on Twitch TV or maybe even live in person. Wouldn't that be nice? Thanks a lot. Good night.